a waitress serves a coffee to a millionaire, she freezes, realizing the man who walked into her cafe is the same one who disappeared 12 years ago, leaving her pregnant and alone. Now, secrets, betrayals, and an unexpected reunion threaten to unravel everything she's built. Will the truth destroy them or bring them together? If you are new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Now let's move to this wonderful story. Sophie Daniels had always been good at pretending, good at hiding the fact that she was struggling, good at masking the exhaustion that came from juggling a demanding job with raising her 12-year-old son, Ben, on her own. Every day she put on her apron, smiled brightly at the customers at Cafe Serena, and made their morning lattes with a practiced ease. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, and that was all she needed. For 5 years, Sophie had worked at the upscale cafe in the heart of downtown Portland, a city where the wealthy came to sip their coffees and make business deals. It was a busy life, one that required her to move quickly, never stop, and always keep a warm smile on her face. She had grown used to the clinking of silverware, the murmur of conversations, and the hustle of morning routines. It was the life she had made for herself after all the dreams of a different life had slipped away. It was on a typical Thursday morning with the cafe's usual rush of customers that Sophie's world changed. She had just picked up a tray of drinks from behind the counter when Marco, the barista, called out her name. "Order up for table 4, Sophie." She glanced down at the ticket, her eyes scanning the list of drinks as she carefully balanced the tray. And then she froze. Her breath caught in her throat as she read the name written at the top of the ticket. Michael Reed. Her hands trembled slightly, and for a brief moment, she felt as though the cafe had disappeared around her, leaving only the name that brought back memories she had tried so hard to bury. Michael Reed, the name that had once meant everything to her, a name she hadn't heard in over 12 years. The same Michael who had once promised her the world, the same Michael who had disappeared when she needed him most. Sophie hadn't seen him since that summer, the summer that had changed her life in ways she could never have imagined. When he left, he took with him all the promises of a future together, and in his place, he left nothing but empty dreams and a broken heart. With a deep breath, Sophie forced herself back to reality. She moved towards table 4, her mind racing with memories of a past she had tried to forget. The sight of him, sitting there, looking so much like the boy she had once known and loved, sent a wave of emotions crashing over her. He was older, now, his face more defined, his eyes carrying a weight she had never seen before. But despite the changes, Sophie recognized him immediately. He hadn't changed as much as she thought. As she approached the table, Sophie noticed he was engrossed in his phone, not even looking up as she set the drinks down in front of him. The moment felt surreal, like she was living in a dream. "Is everything all right?" he asked, glancing up briefly, his voice low and casual, unaware of the storm brewing inside her. Sophie blinked, forcing a smile, even though her heart was racing. "Yes, sir, everything's fine." Her voice felt foreign to her, distant and hollow, but she managed to finish setting down the drinks. "Will there be anything else?" she asked, though the words felt meaningless in the moment. "No, that's all for now," Michael replied, his attention already returning to his phone. Sophie stood there for a moment, watching him, wondering if he recognized her at all. He had to know who she was, didn't he? But no. He was too absorbed in his world to see the woman who had once been everything to him. As Sophie turned to leave, her heart was heavy with the weight of unanswered questions. Did he remember her? Did he even care? She tried to tell herself that it didn't matter, that she had moved on, built a life without him. But the truth was, part of her had never really let go. The life she had created for herself and Ben was filled with love. Yes, but it was also filled with loss. The loss of what could have been, the loss of the life she had once dreamed of having. Throughout the rest of her shift, Sophie couldn't stop glancing at Michael. He sat in the corner, surrounded by men in expensive suits, confidently making business deals, his words sharp and calculated. He was no longer the carefree young man she had fallen in love with. He had become someone else, someone she didn't know anymore. And yet, there was a familiarity to him, a connection she couldn't ignore. When the cafe quieted down, Sophie found herself retreating to the back, her mind swirling with emotions. She tried to push the thoughts away, focusing on the tasks at hand, but everything seemed to bring her back to Michael. How had it come to this? How had she gone from dreaming of a life with him to serving him coffee in a cafe, pretending he was just another customer? As the day wore on, Sophie tried to convince herself that this was just another passing moment in her life. She would continue doing her job, caring for Ben and moving forward. But deep down, a part of her still clung to the hope that one day, things might be different. Maybe Michael would remember her. Maybe he would realize the truth of what had been lost. And maybe, just maybe, he would want to be a part of her life again. But for now, she was left with nothing but unanswered questions and the ache of a love that had never truly faded, no matter how hard she tried to let it go. Sophie had learned to keep her emotions in check over the years. Being a single mom meant that every day required strength, not only to face the demands of work, but to protect her son from the pain of the past. But that morning, as she had locked eyes with Michael, it all came rushing back, the feelings, the heartbreak, the betrayal. She tried to push it all down, to compartmentalize it like she had for the past 12 years, but this time, it wasn't so easy. The next morning, Sophie arrived at Cafe Serena early. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, and the streets were quiet. Sophie loved the calmness of these early hours before the rush of customers filled the air with noise. She made herself a cup of coffee and sat by the window, staring out at the empty street. But even the stillness around her couldn't bring her peace. Her thoughts kept returning to Michael. Had he truly forgotten everything? Had he moved on without a second thought? Sophie couldn't decide whether to be angry or to feel sorry for him. They had been so young when they first met, so full of dreams and promises. Back then, Michael had told her that they would build a future together. He had made her believe that nothing could tear them apart. But when the time came, he vanished, leaving her to face the consequences alone. As Sophie sipped her coffee, the door chimed and she looked up. It was Michael again. He walked in looking more polished than the day before, dressed in a sharp suit that made him appear every bit the successful businessman he had become. He glanced around, his eyes scanning the room as if searching for something, and then his gaze landed on Sophie. She froze for a split second before quickly looking away, hoping he wouldn't recognize her. But of course he did. "Sophie," Michael said, his voice low and hesitant. She could hear the confusion in his tone, as if he was trying to place her, but something in his eyes told her that he remembered more than he let on. "It's you, isn't it?" Sophie stood there, unsure of how to respond. Her heart raced in her chest and her mind went blank. This was it, the moment she had been dreading. The moment when the past collided with the present, and there was no going back. "Yes, it's me," she said quietly, her voice betraying the calm exterior she had worked so hard to maintain. She forced a smile, even though it felt like her world was crumbling around her. Michael stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. "I didn't realize you worked here. I didn't expect to see you again." Sophie nodded, unable to speak, for a moment. What was there to say? That she had spent the last 12 years raising his son alone without a word from him? That she had tried to move on, but a part of her had always wondered why he had disappeared. There was too much to say, and none of it felt right for the moment. "How have you been?" Michael asked, his tone softer now. His voice carried an edge of regret, though Sophie wasn't sure if it was for her or for himself. "I've been fine," she said quickly, still not meeting his eyes. "Just working. Raising Ben, you know, life, Ben." Michael's eyes lit up as he said the name, and Sophie's heart dropped. How could he just casually mention their son like this, after all these years? Had he never wondered about him? Had he never cared? "How old is he now?" "He's 12, Sophie replied, her voice tight. "He's doing well. School, science projects, just like any other kid." Michael nodded, but Sophie could see the wheels turning in his mind. He was starting to put the pieces together. She could feel the tension building between them, It was as if everything they had left unsaid over the years was suddenly on the verge of coming to light. "I should probably get back to work," Sophie said, stepping away from the counter. She didn't want to talk about Ben anymore. Not here. Not like this. But Michael wasn't finished. He reached out, grabbing her wrist, gently, almost as if he didn't want to let her go. "Sophie, I don't understand. Why didn't you ever reach out to me? Why didn't you tell me?" The question hit her like a slap to the face. She had told him, hadn't she? She had tried. Countless letters, phone calls, visits to his family's estate. But none of it had mattered. Michael had disappeared. His family had made sure of that. His mother, Claire, had shut her out and told her to go away. Sophie had been young, alone and scared, and Michael had never come for her. "You wouldn't have listened," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I tried. I really did. But your family made sure you wouldn't hear me." Michael's grip on her wrist loosened as he processed her words. His face went pale, his eyes filled with confusion and disbelief. "My family? What are you talking about?" Sophie took a deep breath, fighting the tears that threatened to fall. She could see that he didn't understand, that he still didn't get it. After all this time, he still didn't know the truth. The truth about how his family had manipulated everything, how they had kept him from his son, from the woman he had loved. "Michael," she said, her voice trembling, "you don't know the half of it." He stepped back, his mind clearly reeling. "What do you mean? Tell me." But Sophie shook her head. "Not here. Not now. I have to work." She turned away, leaving him standing there, still trying to piece together the shattered remnants of their past. As she moved through her shift, Sophie couldn't help but steal glances at Michael. He sat at his table, lost in conversation with his business associates, but his eyes kept flicking back to her. And every time they met, Sophie's heart skipped a beat. How had it come to this? How had they gone from being young and in love to strangers living parallel lives, never once crossing paths? And as the day wore on, Sophie knew that this encounter was just the beginning. The past had come rushing back, and now there was no going back. Michael would learn the truth, and so would Ben. The question was, how would they all deal with it when the truth finally came to light? Sophie couldn't stop thinking about Michael. The brief encounter had thrown her into a storm of emotions she wasn't ready to face. She had spent years building a life without him, convincing herself that she didn't need him, that she could do it all on her own. But now, as she moved between tables at Cafe Serena, she couldn't escape the questions that lingered in her mind. Why had he left? Had he really never received her letters? And most of all, why was he suddenly back in her life as if nothing had changed? Her son, Ben, had asked about his father again that night, his voice filled with innocence and hope. Sophie had to swallow the lump in her throat each time the topic came up. She had tried her best to answer his questions, to give him the truth without revealing too much. But Ben deserved to know the whole story, didn't he? He had the right to understand why his father had never been a part of his life. As the days passed, Sophie found herself wrestling with the decision. Should she tell Ben the full truth? Should she tell him about Michael's abandonment? About how his mother had made sure that their relationship was severed before it even had a chance to grow? Sophie hated the idea of breaking her son's heart, but she knew that the truth was something that couldn't be hidden forever. The next time she saw Michael, it was at the cafe again. This time, there was no avoiding him. He had come in during her lunch shift, and when their eyes met, Sophie felt the weight of everything that had been left unsaid between them. Michael stood near the counter, scanning the room as he waited for his order. He was alone, no business associates, no distractions. It was just the two of them. Sophie took a deep breath and walked over to his table. There was no turning back now. "Mr. Reed," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, "what can I get for you today?" Michael looked up from his phone, his eyes softening as they met hers. "Sophie," he said quietly, as though the name carried a weight he hadn't expected. He paused for a moment, and Sophie felt the tension in the air, thick and unspoken. "How have you been?" he asked, his voice almost tentative. Sophie nodded, forcing a smile. I'm fine. Just working. I've been thinking a lot about our conversation the other day, Michael said, his gaze dropping to the table as if he was searching for the right words. I didn't know what happened. I don't understand why you never came to me. Why didn't you try to reach out after that summer? Sophie's heart tightened. She had to swallow the bitterness that threatened to rise up in her throat. How could he ask her that, as if he hadn't been the one to disappear without a trace, as if she hadn't tried everything she could to reach him? I tried, Sophie said, her voice low but firm. I called you. I wrote you letters. I even went to your family's estate, but I was turned away. Your mother made sure I was never able to reach you. She told me you didn't want anything to do with me, and then she paid me to leave. Michael's face shifted, his expression faltering as the weight of her words hit him. My mother, she did that? His voice cracked slightly, and Sophie could see the shock in his eyes. I had no idea. She never said anything about it. She never told me you came to the house. Sophie nodded, a deep ache in her chest as the memories flooded back. She didn't want you to know about me. She didn't want you to know about Ben. And you just vanished. You left me to figure it all out on my own. I didn't know, Michael said, his voice filled with disbelief. I didn't know any of this. Sophie, I thought you left me. I thought you didn't want me in your life anymore. Sophie stared at him for a moment, trying to process the realization that Michael had been just as much a victim of his family's control as she had. All these years she had assumed he had abandoned them. But what if he hadn't known? What if he hadn't been given the choice? I didn't leave you, Sophie whispered. I never wanted to, but your family made sure I didn't have a choice. I couldn't stay in San Diego, not with the way they treated me. I couldn't raise Ben in that environment, so I left. I did what I had to do to survive. Michael reached across the table, his hand hovering just above hers as if unsure whether to touch her. I can't believe this. I don't know how. I didn't know. I don't understand how my family could have kept this from me for so long. I should have fought for you, for us. Sophie pulled her hand away, unable to let him off the hook so easily. It's not just your family, Michael, it's you too. You let them control everything. You let them tell you what to do, who to love. You left me behind without a second thought. The words stung more than Sophie had expected, but she didn't regret saying them. She needed him to understand the pain she had carried for all these years. He needed to understand how much he had hurt her. I didn't want to leave you, Sophie, Michael said, his voice breaking. I loved you. I still do, in a way. But I was so young, and I thought my family would never accept us. I thought I had to choose between them and you, and I chose them. Sophie's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment she couldn't speak. The weight of the past was too much to bear, but hearing him say those words, hearing him admit his mistakes, it made her realize that maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for healing. I don't know if we can fix this, Michael, Sophie said quietly, wiping a tear from her cheek. I don't know if we can fix what happened between us, but I do know that Ben deserves to know the truth. He deserves to know his father. Michael nodded slowly, his face filled with regret and guilt. I'll do whatever it takes. I'll make it right. For him. For both of you. Sophie stood up, her heart heavy but strangely lighter at the same time. I'm not sure if I believe that yet, she said, her voice steady but firm. But I'm willing to give you a chance. A small one. As she walked away, she couldn't help but wonder if this was the beginning of something new, or just another chapter in a story that had already been written. Could she trust him again? Could they build something from the ashes of their past? Only time would tell. But for now, Sophie had a new resolution. She would face the truth no matter how painful, and give Ben the answers he deserved. Sophie Daniels sat at the counter of Cafe Serena, absently wiping down the polished surface, her mind racing. The conversation with Michael replayed in her head over and over. each word echoing in her ears, each moment replaying like a movie she couldn't stop watching. She had hoped for some kind of closure, something that would allow her to move on and leave the past behind. But now the past seemed to be creeping back into her life in ways she hadn't anticipated. Michael's confession had opened old wounds, and the questions were only growing louder. How could she have spent all these years believing that he had abandoned them? How had she convinced herself that he was just another man who had walked away when the truth, his truth, was so much more complicated? And yet, as much as the revelation brought a sense of clarity, it also left her with a heavy heart. Could she truly forgive him for what he had allowed to happen? For the years of silence, the absence of even a single attempt to contact her, to acknowledge the life they had created, her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the cafe door opening. She didn't need to look up to know who it was. Michael had been coming to the cafe every day for the past week. Each time he walked in, her heart would race. Part of her wanted to see him, to confront him, to get all the answers she had longed for. Another part of her wanted to retreat, to hide, to push him out of her life once and for all. But no matter how much she tried to avoid him, it was clear that fate had other plans. This time, as Michael entered, he looked different. His usual air of confidence was replaced with something more vulnerable, more human. He didn't walk in with the same business-like determination, as if he had a meeting to attend. Instead, he looked lost, as if he was searching for something he couldn't quite find. "Sophie," he said, his voice low, almost hesitant. "Can we talk?" Sophie turned to face him, her heart hammering in her chest. She didn't want to have this conversation here, in the middle of the cafe where everyone could see them, where the weight of the past was too heavy to carry in such a public space. But she couldn't deny the urgency in his voice, the quiet desperation that tugged at her. "Michael," she said softly, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm working. This isn't the place for this." "I know," he replied, taking a step closer, his gaze locked on hers. "But I can't keep pretending like everything is fine. I know I've made mistakes, I know I've hurt you, but I need you to understand something. I never knew about Ben. I never knew you came to the house, that you were turned away. I didn't know any of that. And I'm sorry." Sophie looked at him, her expression unreadable. Part of her wanted to reach out, to believe him, to believe that he truly didn't know. But another part of her, the part that had spent so many years raising Ben alone, felt an overwhelming sense of betrayal. How could he not have known? How could he have let this happen? "Michael," she said, her voice trembling, "how could you not know? You didn't even try to find me. You didn't even try to contact me. I was alone, trying to figure out how to raise a child on my own, and you were just living your life like we never mattered." Michael flinched at the words, his face pale. "I didn't know," he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I should have. I should have fought for you, for us. I should have done more." Sophie felt a wave of anger surge through her. "It's too late for that," she snapped, her hand shaking as she set down the cloth she had been using. "You can't just waltz back into my life and expect everything to be okay. Do you know what it's been like, raising Ben without you, without any help, without any answers?" Michael took a step back, his face stricken. "I know," he said softly. "I can't undo the past, Sophie. I can't fix what I did, but I want to make it right. I want to be there for Ben. I want to be there for you, if you'll let me." Sophie felt her chest tighten. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, the pain he was carrying. But could she trust him? Could she trust that he would stay this time? That he wouldn't disappear again when things got difficult? She had been let down too many times before, and she wasn't sure she could take another heartbreak. "Michael, she began, but before she could finish, the sound of the cafe door opening interrupted her. Sophie looked up, her heart sinking as she saw Ben standing at the entrance, his school bag slung over his shoulder. He had arrived earlier than usual, and Sophie hadn't been prepared for him to witness this moment. Mom? Ben's voice was uncertain as he took a few tentative steps into the cafe, his eyes flicking between Sophie and Michael. Sophie's heart sank. She had hoped to keep Ben away from all this confusion, but now there was no hiding the truth. Ben, Sophie said, her voice soft but strained. What are you doing here? Ben's eyes narrowed, his gaze flicking back to Michael. Who's he? He asked, his tone cautious but curious. Sophie took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Ben, this is Michael Reed. She hesitated, unsure how to explain. She had promised herself she would tell Ben the truth. But now, standing in front of Michael with everything so raw and unresolved, she didn't know where to begin. Michael stepped forward, his expression earnest. Ben, he said gently, I'm your father. The words hung in the air, a heavy weight that neither Sophie nor Ben could escape. Sophie watched as Ben's face went blank, his expression unreadable. She could see the confusion in his eyes, the hurt that was already beginning to form. Father? Ben repeated as though he couldn't quite process the word. He looked from Sophie to Michael, his eyes wide with disbelief. You're my dad? Sophie nodded, her heart breaking as she saw the vulnerability in her son's face. This was the moment she had been dreading. This was the moment when everything they had hidden for so long would come tumbling out. Ben stood still, the silence between them stretching, heavy with uncertainty. Sophie wanted to say something, to explain everything, but the words wouldn't come. How could she explain to her son why Michael had been absent for 12 years? How could she explain the pain of trying to raise him without the support of the man who should have been there? I never meant to hurt you, Ben, Michael said softly, his voice thick with emotion. I don't know how to make up for all the years I missed, but I want to try. I want to be part of your life, if you'll let me. Ben turned to Sophie, his eyes searching hers for answers. Is it true? He asked, his voice quiet but filled with so many questions. Is he really my dad? Sophie met her son's gaze, her heart aching. She had tried so hard to protect him, to keep him safe from the pain of the past. But now the truth was out in the open, and there was no turning back. She took a deep breath and nodded. Yes, Ben, she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. It's true. He's your father. The room seemed to grow still, the weight of the moment settling in. Michael, standing beside Sophie, didn't know what to say. He had never imagined that meeting his son like this, at the cafe, in front, of all the people Sophie had carefully shielded him from, would be so difficult. But here they were, caught between the past and the present, with a future that was uncertain and full of possibility. I think we need to talk, Sophie said, her voice quiet but firm. She turned to Michael, her eyes filled with both resolve and sadness. And we need to figure out what comes next. For Ben. For all of us. As she spoke, Sophie knew that nothing would ever be the same again. But for the first time in years, she felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something new,